Hey, ladies.
Attention, attention, attention.
It's time to get serious about your money.
This couldn't have come at a better time.
Check it out.
It's your money.
I like it like this.
Time to make it your business.
Beyond the Bling starts now on HUR Voices.
Welcome once again to another edition of Beyond the Bling right here on Sirius XM, Channel 141, HUR Voices. I'm Renee Nash.
And I'm Muriel Gar.
Muriel, today a conversation about millennials and what they think about money. Yeah.
Other than the fact that it doesn't grow on trees?
Yeah, and you know, millennials actually have a sense that they're going to become millionaires almost overnight. A new report says that the average millennial thinks that he or she will be a millionaire by the age of 40.
It's the microwave generation.
Yeah.
It's immediate gratification in everything that they do. So why should we not expect the same in how they think about money?
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about I guess perhaps putting a little bit of realisticness to this conversation when it comes to millennials. And so our guest today is James Virgilio. He is the co-founder of Chacon, Diaz, and Virgilio. It is a wealth management organization. And again, he's going to help us shape this conversation about millennials and money and really what they can do if they really want to reach that goal of being a millionaire by the age of 40. So, James, thank you so much for joining us today for Beyond the Bling.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. So, again, you know, many of us want to be millionaires. I know I certainly would want to be a millionaire by the age of 40, and maybe I'll be that by the age of 140, because obviously I have missed the 40-year-old mark. But how realistic is it that you, as a millennial, can become a millionaire? And I guess perhaps even the more basic question is, why are they believing that to be true?
Well, there's two parts to that answer. One is, how realistic is it? Well, mathematically, it's certainly achievable. If you were to save enough money per year and then invest that amount of money per year, you could mathematically create an expectation for what it takes to be a millionaire at 40. The reality is life is far more complicated than that. Very few people can save that much money. And really, if you think of some of the famous bloggers out there like the Money Mustache, the way they're doing it is they're living off $20,000 or $25,000 a year when they retire at the age of 40. If you ask me, that's not exactly the best way to go about living your life. But I think the idea comes from the fact that if I work hard, hustle hard, make smart decisions, $1 million will simply appear into my bank account one day. And again, it's not quite that linear. You can't just work hard and assume that you'll make enough money. But the reality is almost every single millennial should have more than $1 million in their retirement and savings accounts by the time they are ready to retire. That's probably not going to be 40, but all of us should be millionaires one day.
I mean, that's the reality. I mean, we can say that hypothetically, but the reality is, as you've alluded to, is that people are going to live a certain life. Granted, if you start at the age of 20, you start putting aside 20%, you don't touch it, you could actually do that. But, you know, there's also another study that millennials like to travel, they like to put stamps on their passports, they want the best of everything. So how are you going to do both, even if you don't retire at 40, based on the millennial mindset around money?
Well, and the other thing is that millennials are tending to stay at home longer, so maybe that's how they're going to do it. They're just going to live with you and I until they're ready to retire, and then perhaps they can be a millionaire. I don't know.
I thought we were trying to avoid that.
Right. Well, I don't know. James, help us out here.
Actually, that's one of the best ways to become a millionaire, in fact, is to live with your parents well into your early 30s, save every single dollar, right? Have home-cooked meals, have the rent paid for. That would be the fastest way to do it. I actually was quoted in an article a while back about something very similar to that, about sort of the stay-at-home millionaire, if you will. I don't think that does you any favors as an adult. I think part of becoming an adult is to take on responsibility. In all disclosure, I'm also a millennial. But I think in life, you know, you don't want to be using someone else's resources to leverage up your own, when you should, in fact, sort of be using your own resources. But I think the topic of good financial management is difficult for any generation to grasp. Millennials seem to be by far the most talked about generation really of the past 30 or 40 years, certainly since the baby boomers. But their financial habits really aren't that different from most other generations. In fact, I would argue that financially, we have a human behavior problem. It is very hard for us to deal with something you mentioned, taking care of our present self, the person that wants to travel and have nice meals and enjoy their life, and our future self, the person that needs to have their needs taken care of later on in life. I think the right way to do this is to balance out both of those people, make sure both your present self and your future self are happy. But that takes some commitment, some planning, finding out what's best to do when it comes to how you invest or how you actually handle your money and your taxes and where you work and where you live. And so a lot of times it becomes too complicated and we just picked one or the other. We say, I'm going to become a millionaire by 40. I'll live with my parents, or forget it. I'll think about this later and I'll have nothing saved when I'm in my 50s. It seems to be very common that those two extremes are the ones that exist.
But James, now it's interesting. You said we have a human behavior problem. However, I would argue, and I think the recent working paper by Brookings would align with that, is that this generation is nowhere near the disciplines that the generation before them. And the Brookings Institution paper basically noted that millennials are less wealthy than their parents were at the same age. So is it a human behavioral problem, or is it the fact that the millennial generation tends to have a lens on how people around the world are living, and they have unrealistic expectations of their capabilities based on where they are?
Well, plus the other side of that, Muriel, is that the reality is that many millennials are already saddled with debt. I mean, they're coming out of school, owing $40, $50, $60, $70, $80,000 in debt. So if you already got that coming out of the gate, what do you do? And how do you get to being a millionaire when you're already, way deep in the hole?
But I think okay, so James, because you are our guest, because Renee and I could volley this back and forth. I mean, because I would say that, I think we have to look at the cost of the dollar, or what the dollar can buy relative to time. So yes, they're coming out with these huge student loan debts. However, our parents were trying to, they had housing costs. So there's some parallels if you look at the value of the dollar over time, in my opinion.
Okay.
James?
A lot of good points here. Let's start with the very first one you made with the Brookings paper. The problem with a lot of the generational research, and especially the Brookings paper, is the methodology they use. I could cite 4 or 5 different articles and research papers that would come to a very different conclusion. For example, millennials save more money than any generation before them. Millennials are far more likely to engage in financial planning than any generation before them. The major reason papers like the Brookings and others suggest that millennials are behind is because they don't own homes. However, I would argue that not owning a home is actually a much better financial move. This is not news to anyone. If you were to go to Stanford or Harvard or Yale or any real estate professor for the past 50 years, they would all tell you the same thing. Owning a home generally costs you money. And there are obviously exceptions to rules, but if you're looking at a balance sheet, you're saying, well, wait a minute, if a 30-year-old owns a home, they own something. It's an asset. To me, that's really not the proper way to look at how wealthy someone is. Homes really are use assets or things that don't generate money. You'd much rather have an investment account or money that's far more usable than a home. When it comes right down to it, if you look at Gen X versus baby boomers versus millennials, you could argue millennials have better savings habits. But the second thing you said is also true. Millennials tend to be far more unrealistic about their future, regardless of where they are. So boomers, much more grounded. I need to work hard. I have to provide for myself and provide for my family. Millennials tend to think they can sort of do whatever they want, save some money, and one day it will all work out. I think at either case, none of the extremes are true. However, millennials definitely get a bad rap when it comes to what they own. And again, this is almost exclusively due to the fact that they rent homes over buying homes. And I've written several papers on this, on the merits of renting versus owning and which one wins. Yeah. And spoiler alert, renting actually saves you more money. Again, that's not my own conclusion. There are several others that will echo that. That tends to give millennials a really bad rap when it comes to financial matters.
Yeah, I would, James, and full disclosure, I'm a parent of two millennials.
So am I.
Two millennials who I have beaten it over their head. The value of home ownership, right? I made sure that each of my kids, by the age of 25, owned a home, So I tend to disagree. I guess my question to you is, absent of owning a home, how do you build this wealth portfolio that, again, these millennials want to do? Because home ownership, at least from my generation, I'm a baby boomer, right? And from my generation, that is where the generational wealth comes from. Whether you buy a home to live in it, then you make some investments in it, and then you go and buy some other investment properties. Short of the stock market, I'm just trying to figure out, how are you getting to this $1 million mark by the age of 40 as a millennial? Or, again, getting yourself to a point where you are self-sufficient in not living and renting and making somebody else rich by paying rent. Because we live here in Washington, D.C. You're paying $1,500, $2,000, $3,000 on up in rent. And for the life of me, I can't ever see how that makes sense.
And the other thing I would add to that, James, it's like we're double teaming you here. That I would suffice to say that as a wealth management professional that's managing the assets of your client base, that within your client base are real estate investments. And so somewhere in there, I think we have to balance out. And now I will agree with you that over time, depending on who you are and where you live, renting could be a greater value to the balance sheet than home ownership, because there's more that comes to home ownership than just the mortgage. However, when we look at the cost of living and the fact that you can pay a mortgage and then write that interest off as a tax deduction.
And that's where I was going. So without that, well, what are you writing off on taxes if you're making, $67,000, $80,000, $100,000 with no kids? You're paying Uncle Sam a gazillion amount of money, and you have no itemizations at all.
All right, James.
These are
James.
good challenges. I'm glad that we're talking about these things.
Yes.
Home ownership is also an emotionally charged thing. I think the bigger takeaway here is one, everything we'll talk about today is based upon the mathematical history and expectations. So we have to kind of put our feelings aside. And certainly different markets, like we mentioned, will change the dynamics. But on average, owning a home will cost you more money over your lifetime than renting a home. But here's the caveat. When you own a home, you're going to put a down payment into your home. You possibly will invest to put more money into your home. The renter, to equalize the home buyer versus the renter, will then be investing money into something, let's say like the stock market, because you can't say person A buys a home, person B rents, but the renter doesn't do anything with the extra money, right? They're saving the money the home buyer puts in. But let's leave that aside. Here's the key. Nobody is getting wealthy owning the home they live in. That's a fallacy. Now, if you talk about owning,
James, I gotta pull.
Let me finish. If you want to look at how to make the most amount of money, it's not in a home. I'll give you Exhibit A. Warren Buffett, probably the most famous investor of all time. He does own a home. He owns one home. He's never moved. He frequently talks about residential real estate not being an investment. Why? Because you can make so much more money in other things. Now, pause for a second. If you want to go buy 3 or 4 homes and rent them out, that certainly is an investment strategy. But when we're talking about renting versus buying, we're talking about somebody living in their home versus somebody renting a home. It is certainly a viable strategy to buy properties and rent them out. Absolutely, that's a viable strategy, but that's not what most Americans are going to wind up doing when they answer that question. All right, go ahead. I'm ready.
You know what? We're going to have to come back on this because the producer's telling me we got to go to break. Take us into break.
Right. Once again, this is Beyond the Bling right here on Sirius XM Channel 141 HUR Voices. I'm Renee Nash.
I'm Muriel Gar, and we'll be back right after this.
All right, welcome back once again to Beyond the Bling right here on Sirius XM, channel 141, HUR Voices. I'm Renee Nash.
And I'm Muriel Gar.
And Muriel, we're having a wonderful, fabulous conversation today about millennials and money. We have a millennial on the line with us. He is
James Virgilio, who's got my tongue tied.
Yes.
He is really adamant about the position of his fellow millennials.
Yeah, and we're talking specifically right now about home ownership versus renting. And James, you are, pretty adamant in your belief that renting for many millennials is probably a better option. Muriel and I perhaps disagree with you, I would say.
James says that renting is not the way to wealth creation.
Mm-hmm.
And so, James, I'm going to, and I will say you gave the caveat for most. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to give you a scenario, James. A 21-year-old female who did not finish college, who has 3 children, and who is working and earning $45,000 a year.
I have a real life scenario that I can speak to from personal perspective. My now 32-year-old son purchased his home when he was 25. In 2012, purchased his home for $149,000. Sitting on that home right now is worth close to $300,000. Not close to, it's worth $315,000. No college education, right? He did not go to college, but he is sitting on that and is about to purchase his second property from money from the first.
So he's taking that equity.
Yeah.
So this female now doesn't have a college education, is able to take advantage of a home ownership program where she had minimal cash out of pocket. As a matter of fact, her cash out of pocket was $500. So she then went into that home. She stayed in that home for 8 years. The home appreciated. She was able to then take the equity to go back to school, finish her education, and also send her children to college. Come on now. I think part of the challenge for this millennial generation is because so many have had opportunities as a result of the generation that came before them. They're college educated. They're walking into jobs demanding salaries that their parents would have never even thought of demanding. So they don't see things based out of the view that they are really the minority, not the majority of young people who are striving to obtain wealth. So I'm going to pull back because this is your show. You are the guest. So James.
No, this is our show. This is good. Let me pause for a second and first kind of give you a little bit of my background.
Sure.
One, I am a fiduciary, which means that everything that I do legally has to be in the best interest of my clients. Everything I say and do is based upon research. Now, my feelings, I have no personal feeling between renting versus owning a home. My job is to do the research and find out what is best based upon the math, which means I have to put my feelings aside. So I will ask you a question. On average, in the United States, what do you think residential homes appreciate at per year? On average, what do you think?
On average, the appreciation, if we do global, is between 3% and 7%. In some markets, San Francisco, New York, Chicago, Washington, D.C., it's anywhere between 10 and 17%. And that's a huge swing.
So for the past 110 years, on average in this country, when you take out inflation, which is about 3.2%, residential real estate averages 0.4% per year in return. 0.4. Now, factor in the cost of a mortgage, factor in the cost of property tax, factor in the cost of upkeep. What do you think the average expected annual return on a residential home is? Take a guess. Go ahead.
You factored in those, but you did not factor in the tax benefit. Is there a reason why?
I'm going to get to that. So it's minus 10.8%. That's the mathematical average. Again, that's not a made-up number. That's verified by plenty of academic studies. Minus 10.8% in the past 110 years is the average return on owning a residential home. What's the tax benefit? Less than 10%. Less than 10% of U.S. taxpayers in 2020 will get any kind of tax benefit on their taxes. Of that 10%, very few of them will get anything material. That benefit used to be very, very good in the 70s and 80s. In fact, there was a large reason why you might want to consider owning a home back then. That benefit is no longer. So if you actually factor in all of the math, what you'll find is that on average, owning a home is not a way to build wealth. Now, there are reasons to own a home. Certainly emotional, planting your seeds, having a family, having a house you can change. There are reasons to own one. But if you're making the argument that it will make you wealthy, that falls short. Now, you did mention something important. One of the major reasons owning a home looks so good is because you can use a lot of leverage to get it.
That's
you
exactly
mentioned somebody buying a home with just $500 down. Who owns the home, the person or the bank? The bank owns the home, right? You're going to make all of those payments. And then when you sell the home, if you get the appreciation, you minus out your mortgage, you minus out all of your cost, you get your certain gain. Is that a way to build some equity?
But James,
yes, it is. Hold on. But if you look, you look at how to build wealth, again, there's a long article on my website which goes through every scenario we're talking about. If you look at how to build wealth, the best way to build wealth since the beginning of investable markets is in the stock market. That is the best way to build wealth. It's the most consistent and averages the highest return.
James, we are having this conversation. So, James, we're having this conversation during a period of time where the stock market is extremely volatile. And those that are actually, the pundits are actually saying that the stock market is not the ideal way to build wealth. They're actually talking about entrepreneurship and guess what else? Real estate. So, but that's okay. Because I appreciate having dialogue with a very educated man. It stimulates me.
Here's my question, because I mean, to me, we have candid conversations on this show. Obviously, I always say I don't do money, I do radio. Muriel is the money person on this show, so I'm your basic person who's made money, made mistakes, still trying to get it together. So, make this make sense in the Black and brown community when you're talking about this, because to me, I don't know. I'm thinking there may be a sense of danger when you're saying to Black and brown people that it's not a good idea, it's necessarily so, millennials, to own a home, that you need to put your money in the stock market. So tell me how you say that in the Black and brown community when you have persons like Muriel and myself who tell our children, you need to buy a house. Right? So you're really kind of going totally against the grain, which many people of color have known for generations. We were the people when the housing crisis hit. I mean, the rest of the country caught a cold. We caught pneumonia, right? So make that make sense to the Black and brown community, and specifically to the African American community, I should say, in today's world, as you're going to be speaking to college students.
Because the other aspect of this, and we've said that he who owns the land calls the shots. If you don't have ownership, someone else actually controls your destiny. I get where you're going, James. I clearly understand the argument as it pertains to home ownership is more than just a mortgage. And we were supposed to be talking about more in investing. I totally get that, but I do agree with Renee that it is extremely dangerous when we say, home ownership is not the way to wealth creation, particularly in this societal time. The benefits of today did not come without sacrifice and a loss of some type. When we start taking away the basics of where you're going to reside and leveraging that in order to get the things that you want, because that leverage that you
especially here in Washington D.C. as we're dealing with gentrification in the worst kind of way
in high rent markets, because the leverage doesn't just occur when you sell the home. The leverage occurs as other things happen to transpire. And I will say, right now we're in a 3% market. You've got individuals that have an enormous amount of consumer debt. And the word is, you need to pull some of that equity out to take care of that consumer debt so that you have some cash. So I think we need to really balance the value of home ownership versus the negative side of it. And we've got 2 minutes left, James, for you to just wrap all that up.
Well, you're raising good points, but I think the problem is we're focused on home ownership, and in reality, you need to be focused on saving. For the Black and brown community, it's no different than any other community. The major problem is the Black and brown community doesn't save as much money. A lot of it goes into things, whether it's things like permanent or whole life insurance, which I could spend a lot of time talking about not getting that as well. The way to build wealth is, in fact, to own things. The question to ask yourself is, what should we be owning? Things like building an emergency fund to be able to handle for loss of job or difficult situations like that, moving in with roommates, moving out of Washington, D.C., using your flexibility to go to different places. If you're actually going to do a study on how would I take this young family or this single family or this couple or whatever the case may be and say, how would I build wealth for them? The answer is always the same. You want to build a path to ownership as soon as possible. One thing that renting responsibly does is it gives you flexibility. You're able to move much faster. You can switch cities more quickly. You're not stuck with costs. And secondarily, let's not forget that the residential real estate market is a lagging indicator. If the stock market crashes, the real estate market will not be far behind. Why? Because people will have less wealth. So we can't be too reductive here, but the answer is always the same. There are fundamental ways to build wealth, and it starts first with running a budget surplus. No matter what you're making, your job should be to save 10% of your gross income for your future. And if you can't do that, do all you can to get yourself in a living situation that allows you to do that, because the sooner you do that, the sooner you can begin to build real wealth.
I agree with everything you just said.
Yeah.
I agree with. Now, but you know what, James? We're out of time. So how can our listeners find out more about you, engage you as far as speaking engagements, and even pursue you to manage their funds?
Sure. You can read about me if you come even remotely close to Googling my name, James D. Virgilio. My website is C as in Charlie, D as in David, D as in David, wealth.com. There's an article in depth on homeownership versus renting, as well as many other topics that have to do with financial planning. And of course, on my website, my email is there as well. Feel free to reach out to me. Our firm does a lot of pro bono work and consulting around the country. I'm on this show because I believe in trying to get the truth out about building wealth. And I think that's really a mission that all of us in the finance world should have. And unfortunately, few of us seem to carry.
Yeah.
And D. Virgilio is DIVIRGILIO. Is that correct?
Well said. That's it.
Right. All right. James D. Virgilio, again, a co-founder of Chacon, Diaz, and D. Virgilio Wealth Management. Thank you so much for joining us. Great conversation. Make sure you check out his information. Google him. Go to his website. Lots of great information there.
It's been a great show.
Yeah.
Every day, as we say at the close of every show, it's your money.
Make it your business.